So the matchup everybody wanted to see, part 2, which was supposed to be in Indianapolis in a dome, but instead it would be outside in Pasadena, California. I'm Stephen Means, that's Andrew Gillis, and that's Stefan Krajisnik. Ohio State, Oregon once again. Oregon won round 1, 32-31 in Eugene, Oregon at Autzen Stadium. Round 2, neutral side field. As of the opening number, Ohio State I think is a 1.5-point favorite. They were the 3-point favorite had they gotten to Indianapolis against them. We've seen a lot, and we're going to be talking about this for the next couple weeks on Buckeye Talk, so go get that wherever you find podcasts. But, Stefan, to the best of their ability, I know there's injuries on the offensive line. Do you think Ohio State, if you had to make a checklist of the things that Ohio State had to fix that were reasonable to fix by the time they got to Oregon again, if they got there, do you think those things have been fixed?
Yeah, at least that's what it looked like against Tennessee, right? Like it's what we talked about in some of our other videos. If you got to show me now that you can replicate it, right? Whether that be Will Howard, can you replicate this performance? Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, can you replicate maybe not this game plan, but a game plan that utilizes your weapons the way you did tonight? If you could do all that, you could beat anyone in the country. Frankly, had they done that, they would have beat Michigan too. Would beat whatever. You get the point. This team has everything in place, and it's everyone around the country going into this Tennessee game was saying, as long as they're mentally here, they can beat anyone. They can beat Tennessee, they can win the national championship. But if they're not mentally there, they can lose to Tennessee. They were locked in, they were ready, they played well against Tennessee, they beat the brakes off of Tennessee. So yeah, I think this team, if they can replicate some of the things that they did against Tennessee, can win a national championship, let alone beat Oregon.
If you had an Oregon checklist of things, Andrew, that realistically could fix at this point, do you think that they've checked off all those things?
Realistically, I think yes. Obviously, the offensive line is just not going to be a check mark because, I asked Donovan Jackson this after the game. I was like, hey, you played a really good defensive line last time, and now you're going to go up against a better defensive line from Oregon, and you're playing a different spot. So, there are challenges that Ohio State that's the world we're in right now. Ain't no time for excuses. You got 3, who cares? Nobody cares that Ohio State's offensive line is injured. You got to figure it out. Under that context, I think they have figured some things out. I think they have figured out kind of maybe how to scheme around an offensive line that, is inexperienced, is not what it was. I mean, you lose the Remington Award winner, you lose maybe a first-round draft pick at tackle. That's going to hurt any team. So I think they figured out a way to maybe scheme around that a little bit. The defense, Jack Sawyer said it wasn't so much a revamping, it was a tightening up of issues after the Oregon game. So I think they have figured out that, man, sometimes this front four is not going to get home like maybe you had wanted in the season, but they can disguise and get pressure in other ways. Now, this is a really interesting matchup for me because Ohio State is kind of different from the last time we saw Oregon, and I think that happens on the trenches because Ohio State's offensive line, they're not as good. Oregon, Jordan Birch is going to play. And Oregon's defensive line is really good. And Ohio State's defensive line, I think if you pair that with the front 7 and the front 6, I guess, where they're blitzing, I think they're better. So it's a really interesting matchup, and I think those boxes are checked for what you want to see to beat Oregon. Now, these are probably just the 2 most talented, 2 best teams in the country. So Ohio State could be clicking. Ohio State could be on. Ohio State could be firing. And they just lose a game to the number 1 team in the country, and you could say, you know what, the best 2 teams in the country played. It was a really tight game, went down to the wire. One team won, one team didn't. But if Ohio State's clicking, Oregon is also clicking. Oregon also has to be clicking because if Oregon is not clicking in that game, they will lose to an Ohio State team that played like this tonight.
So I think Penn State may have exposed some things about Oregon in that Big Ten championship game, which is pretty interesting given that's the last time Oregon played football, which also means they've had a month to correct whatever those issues were, or not correct. Who knows, right? We don't know. But what I do know is the last time Ohio State played Oregon, the defense had their existential soul-searching moment the way that the offense had to after the Michigan game. And as a result, that's what you're talking about, right? You saw some changes in how they maybe attack an offense, right? You saw them get back to some things that they did with Jim Knowles before he had gotten to Ohio State. So Oregon has technically never played this Ohio State defense before because of that, right? And the offensive line issues are the offensive line issues. But I think what we saw against Tennessee is, okay, they can scheme around it. So if they can scheme around it offensively, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Ibuka, Carnell Tate are still Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Ibuka. Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are getting involved in the passing game now, but which I think is a cool wrinkle. We even saw them on the field at the same time. But this is a different defense. In this aggressive defense, who came out here like this against Tennessee, if they can repeat this performance, but maybe uptick a little bit more because you're playing a better offense and you're playing a better quarterback, Denzel Burke's mistakes in that game can be more of a fluke, right? What we saw from the secondary could be more of a fluke. What we saw from the defensive line could be more of a fluke because Jim Knowles has figured out you got to be aggressive with the play calls. You got to scheme some stuff up. And if you do that first, then it allows your defensive line to get to work and get to start rolling on guys. And that's what we've seen against Indiana, and that's what we saw against Tennessee more importantly is you started by coming at them with all this stuff, and then by the middle of the second quarter, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and Tyleek Williams are just winning one-on-ones because that's how this works. You can't just go four-man antiquated rush, as Nick Saban called it. You got to coach, essentially, the coach. And then as the game goes on, your playmakers will start making the plays that you need them to make. So I agree. I think they're ready. I don't think that means they're going to win. I also don't think it means they're going to lose. What I do think it means that what we saw in Eugene, I think we see a similar result in terms of how it plays out and what a win looks like for either side. This is a one-score, potentially field goal game. It's just Ohio State's had to tweak some things because it's had two existential losses that have made them soul search and really changed some things up in how they do things. And I think because of that, we're seeing the best of Ohio State that we can see given the offensive line. But I don't think it's a crutch anymore. At least it shouldn't be with the two guys that are scheming up this offense. And that's a good thing for Ohio State. Plus, this is a conversation of rust versus rest. Ohio State's got some momentum now. Oregon hasn't played in 30 days by the time this game plays on January 1st. We will be there. Get the text 614-350-355. I tried to do a jingle and I messed it up. See, this is what happens when you get away from the basics. Back to the basics like these coaches did, which is why they're headed to the Rose Bowl. Andrew, Stefan, Stephen, see you out in California, out of the cold.